On a foggy March morning, the police in Rosefield, England, were called to investigate a case that stunned the entire community. What began as a whispered affair between a Muslim immigrant gardener and his neighbor's wife quickly spiraled into darkness, leaving a young man dead and the neighborhood shrouded in mystery. This is the story of Amir, a man caught in a tragic web of love, betrayal, and obsession that would haunt those involved forever. Amir arrived in Rosefield in 2003, driven by a quiet determination to start fresh. Coming from the tumultuous streets of Beirut, he was no stranger to struggle and hardship. As a young man in his 20s, he'd known little beyond the constant hum of conflict, his life marked by the sounds of sirens, the uncertainty of each new day, and the dreams he dared to nurture quietly in his heart. His family had stayed behind, caught in their own lives and commitments, but Amir believed that his journey to England would be a new beginning for them all. He had always been a man of few words, his emotions as guarded as his faith. His family values were woven deeply into his identity, guiding him through even the loneliest days in a foreign land. Rosefield was a peaceful, well-to-do neighborhood, known for its old English charm and sprawling homes with manicured lawns and pristine gardens. Its residents, mostly wealthy and refined, appreciated Amir's quiet presence. He was a diligent worker, arriving punctually each day and taking immense pride in his work, often lingering after hours to ensure every flower bed and hedge was perfect. He moved through each garden with a serene grace, meticulously caring for the vibrant flora and transforming the landscapes into lush escapes that the residents loved to showcase. The Sutton family's garden was particularly special to Amir. The colors, the scents, and the arrangement of each flower spoke to him in ways words could not. Mark Sutton, a high-powered businessman in his mid-40s, was hardly ever home to notice Amir's work, his days swallowed by his ambition and need to uphold his reputation. Charlotte, his wife, would sometimes appear in the afternoons, her gaze distant and unfocused, and sit on the patio with a glass of wine. She would watch him as he worked, curious and silent, as if seeking something from him she couldn't quite name. Amir's presence was calming to her, a quiet contrast to the rushed world she knew. Charlotte's life was one of loneliness, bound by the golden walls of her luxurious home. In her late 30s, she had traded her independence for the promise of security, a compromise that seemed almost laughable now. The house, the luxury, and the comforts had lost their appeal. Her husband's attention drifted away from her long ago, and though their relationship was cordial on the surface, the warmth had long since faded. For her, each day felt like a delicate performance, carefully maintaining her role as the refined, elegant wife. She filled her days with social gatherings and charity work, but there was a hollow feeling beneath her poised exterior. Amir's arrival became a quiet beacon in her days, an unscripted moment she hadn't anticipated. At first, her interest in him was distant, almost respectful, as he moved about the garden in his methodical way, lost in his own world. She watched him from a distance, taking in his focus, the way he handled each flower as if it were precious, the lines of his face set with determination. She wondered about his life and his thoughts, but knew the boundary between them was vast. He was a mystery to her, a man who had seen more than she ever would, yet he seemed to carry it all with a sense of peace. Over time, Amir began to notice her too. feeling her presence before he even saw her. Her quiet observation unsettled and intrigued him, yet he was careful to keep his demeanor respectful. It was in the smallest gestures, a subtle meeting of their eyes, a passing smile, or a nod of acknowledgement, that their unspoken understanding grew. He could see the loneliness etched on her face, feel the weight of her gaze, and sense the need for something real, something unscripted in her life. It was this that first tugged at his heart, an instinctive desire to ease her pain, even though he knew he shouldn't. In early spring of 2011, their relationship began to evolve in ways Amir hadn't anticipated. Charlotte started lingering in the garden for longer periods, offering him a cold drink on hot days or a warm cup of tea when the weather grew brisk. Their exchanges were always polite, nothing more than casual observations or remarks on the garden. But with each small conversation, a new layer of closeness unfolded between them. Amir found himself looking forward to their brief encounters, the way her voice softened when she spoke to him, and how her laughter, rare as it was, could lighten even the heaviest of his days. He sensed a lightness in her presence, but Amir also noticed the vulnerability in her gestures, a woman grasping at whatever moments of peace and companionship she could find. Soon, his evenings were filled with thoughts of her, of their brief interactions, and the way she looked at him. The emptiness he had felt for so long started to recede, replaced by a new feeling he could barely name, but one he knew was powerful. It was more than attraction. It was a connection he hadn't felt in years, if ever. Charlotte, on her part, was drawn to Amir's quiet strength, a stark contrast to her husband's aloofness. To her, Amir represented freedom, a man unburdened by the trappings of wealth, someone who, despite his past, still found solace in simple beauty. She admired his resilience, his kindness, and the way he could make her feel seen, truly seen, even without saying much. She began to imagine a life where her choices were not dictated by appearances or social expectations, a life where she could find her own joy. In Amir, she saw a glimpse of that life, an alternate path she never thought possible. By summer, their connection had deepened. The days grew warmer, and with them, so did the intensity of their emotions. Amir's gaze lingered longer, his voice softened when he spoke to her, and Charlotte felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. She knew what she was doing was dangerous, forbidden, but she couldn't resist the pull she felt toward him. She knew it was wrong, but it was the most alive she had felt in years. Their time together became stolen moments in hidden corners of the garden, or on late afternoons when Mark was away on business. Though Amir dreamed of a future with her, he never voiced it, knowing the unlikelihood of such a life. He could only hold on to each stolen glance and cherished moment, each one a brief escape from the reality they both knew too well. As they spent more time together, Amir could feel his love for her intensify, yet he sensed the guarded part of her that remained distant, holding back. To him, she was the promise of something he had never known. But for Charlotte, it was the thrill, the escape she needed to feel alive, even if only for a while. Charlotte's heart, while captivated, remained grounded in her own reality. She could not imagine breaking away from her carefully constructed life. Her time with Amir was exhilarating, a reminder of the woman she used to be before marriage, wealth and responsibility had molded her into someone else. The affair became her secret, one she treasured in the quiet hours of the night when the loneliness returned. It was a fleeting affair to her, but for Amir, it was something much deeper, something he could not easily let go. The affair continued for months, with Amir caught in a silent battle between his desire and his values, and Charlotte clinging to the thrill, savoring every clandestine moment. By late 2013, the once passionate affair between Amir and Charlotte had begun to unravel, leaving Amir in a state of quiet confusion and longing. He noticed how her gaze no longer lingered on him, how the small gestures of affection they had shared were becoming rare and hesitant. Charlotte's visits to the garden dwindled, and when they did meet, she seemed preoccupied, as if her mind were elsewhere. It was subtle, but to Amir, each change felt like a wound, a silent betrayal that gnawed at his heart. He felt her slipping away, her laughter dimmed, her smiles now only a faint echo of what they once shared. Charlotte, for her part, was grappling with a suffocating guilt. The thrill that once energized her was replaced by a mounting fear that her secret would come crashing down around her. She'd begun to see the risk that her actions posed, not just to herself, but to her husband, her family, her very place in the world she knew so well. She could feel the weight of every decision bearing down on her, and slowly she began to distance herself from Amir, hoping he would understand, even without her having to explain. She was trying to pull herself back into her marriage, to patch the cracks that had widened with every stolen moment she spent with Amir. Mark, her husband, had been oblivious to the affair, but Charlotte feared it was only a matter of time before her facade shattered, exposing the truth. As months passed, Amir's frustration grew. His love for Charlotte had become more than a fleeting passion. It had evolved into something deeper, a commitment in his heart that he was unwilling to abandon. Her coldness and evasion were unbearable, each day marked by the unspoken pain that lingered in every interaction. He could no longer remain silent. He needed answers, a sense of direction, some acknowledgement of the love they had shared. Desperation led him to seek her out, hoping that their bond would be enough to sway her. When they finally met, he tried to reach out, to rekindle what they once had. He wanted clarity, even if it was painful, an answer to the question he dared not ask aloud. Did she still love him? Or was he now just a distant memory? Charlotte, however, had made up her mind. In her heart, she knew the risk was too great, the consequences too severe. She could see the vulnerability in Amir's eyes, the heartbreak he tried to mask, but her guilt and fear outweighed the emotions that had once bound them. Amir sensed her determination, felt the finality in her words as she turned away, and it left him hollow. The woman who had once been his sanctuary had become the source of his deepest pain, rejecting him in a way that left him fractured, torn between love and anger. The rejection sent Amir spiraling. Days passed in a haze of sleepless nights and anxious thoughts. His mind was consumed by what had happened, haunted by memories of her, each one clawing at him, pulling him deeper into a state of turmoil. He replayed every conversation, every gesture, wondering where he had gone wrong, searching for an explanation that never came. His work suffered. His life outside the garden became a series of empty moments, each one darker than the last. His once calm demeanor grew restless. His heart, so full of love, was now clouded by anger and confusion. By late February of 2014, Amir's desperation took on a new form, one driven not by love, but by the need to reclaim his dignity. In a single, fevered moment, he made the decision to confront Mark Sutton. In his mind, it was a way to force a resolution, a way to shed light on the shadows that had overtaken his life. On a chilly afternoon, he waited for Mark outside his office, his hands trembling as he anticipated the confrontation. When Mark finally appeared, Amir revealed the affair, sparing no details in an attempt to shock, to hurt, to reclaim what he felt had been stolen from him. Mark was thunderstruck. The revelation left him stunned, frozen as his mind grappled with the unimaginable betrayal. In a single breath, the life he had thought was secure crumbled around him, and an intense fury boiled up within him. Unable to contain his rage, he lunged at Amir, lashing out in a fury that was as much a defense of his pride as it was a reaction to the hurt inflicted on him. Amir managed to evade his blows and flee, leaving Mark reeling in a storm of anger and humiliation, left only with his thoughts and the explosive anger he could no longer suppress. Mark returned home, his mind set on confronting Charlotte. The house that had always felt serene now felt claustrophobic, the walls a prison holding his betrayal. Charlotte could see the fury in his eyes the moment he entered, and the argument that ensued was one unlike any they had ever experienced. Words were thrown like weapons, cutting and tearing at the fragile facade they had once maintained. Mark, feeling the sting of humiliation and anger, lost control in a way he never had before. In a single, furious gesture, he struck her, a shocking culmination to their escalating confrontation. The shock and pain left Charlotte dazed, terrified not just of the physical harm, but of the unraveling chaos of her life. She fled that night, bruised and shaken, seeking refuge with a distant cousin who lived outside the neighborhood. For days, she remained hidden, her heart a mix of shame, fear, and regret. She thought of Amir often, worried about what he might do in his state of despair, yet unable to reach out to him. Her life had shifted overnight from one of quiet predictability to a storm she couldn't control. She kept to herself, hoping to find a way to mend the broken pieces of her life, to salvage what little she could of her dignity and future. Then, on March 6, 2014, the peace of Rosefield was shattered once more. Amir's lifeless body was discovered in a desolate patch of woods just outside the neighborhood. His face marred by bruises, his neck bearing the marks of strangulation. The brutality of his death shocked the community, and whispers spread like wildfire as neighbors pieced together fragments of gossip, each tale growing darker than the last. The police arrived at the scene and began their investigation, working methodically to uncover the truth behind his death. It wasn't long before they discovered the connection between Amir and Charlotte. The affair, once hidden in the quiet shadows of their lives, was now exposed under the harsh scrutiny of the law. Charlotte, who had hoped to lay low and avoid detection, was thrust into the center of a storm of suspicion. Her name became synonymous with scandal, and her life, once a series of carefully constructed appearances, began to unravel completely. Detectives searched for clues, sifting through the fragments of Amir's life, examining his apartment, and speaking to anyone who might have known him. They pieced together his final days, the torment he had endured, the heartbreak that had led to his ultimate confrontation with Mark. They traced his steps, from the garden where he had once found solace, to the confrontation that had set everything into motion. With each clue, each new revelation, the web of deceit grew more complex, leaving everyone to question who was responsible for Amir's tragic end. The investigation intensified, focusing on those closest to him in his final days. Charlotte became the primary suspect, her life and motives dissected under the unforgiving lens of suspicion. Her history with Amir, her fallout with Mark, and the growing turmoil in her life painted a damning picture, one that the investigators would use to slowly unravel the mystery that had captivated and horrified the entire community. On the chilly morning of March 6th, 2014, Rosefield's quiet routine was disrupted when Amir's body was discovered by a local dog walker. He was lying in a remote area, just outside the boundaries of the affluent neighborhood. His face bore the marks of recent bruises, and his neck showed clear signs of strangulation. The shock reverberated through the community almost instantly. Amir was known as the quiet, reserved gardener, a presence that most barely noticed but all appreciated. Now, he had become the center of a disturbing mystery. The police arrived swiftly, cordoning off the area and taking meticulous notes. The initial examination left no doubt. This was a violent death, one that seemed to carry personal fury rather than mere random brutality. Amir had no close family nearby, no known enemies, and led a life so discreet that the detectives struggled to find a clear motive. The immediate questions focused on who could have had reason to end his life so cruelly and why. His injuries suggested a confrontation, one that had spiraled into rage. As detectives pieced together the fragments of Amir's final days, a troubling story of betrayal and heartbreak began to surface. By March 8th, detectives turned their focus to Charlotte, who had quickly become a person of interest. She was Amir's last known romantic connection, and whispers of their relationship, though once hidden, now started to come to light. Charlotte arrived at the police station visibly shaken, her usually composed demeanor tinged with anxiety. Her movements were tense, and her gaze kept drifting as if she were searching for a way to avoid the questions that hung in the air. When detectives questioned her, she was evasive, her responses clipped and lacking in detail. The detectives could sense that there was more beneath the surface, something she was holding back. As they dug deeper, the investigators noticed signs of strain in her relationship with her husband, Mark. It seemed the fallout from her affair with Amir had widened the rift in her marriage, creating a tense and fractured household. They observed that Charlotte's life, once a carefully controlled picture of respectability, was slowly disintegrating. Her reluctance to cooperate only intensified their suspicions. The weight of Amir's death, combined with her strained marriage, seemed to leave her trapped, her every move now under scrutiny. She was aware of how her life had veered off course, yet she offered little to help the detectives, unwilling or perhaps unable to share the truth. Just days later, on March the 10th, Mark was summoned for questioning. Initially, he presented himself as calm and unaffected, a man simply going through the motions to clear his name. He maintained his innocence, asserting that he was unaware of Amir's presence in his family's life until the affair had been uncovered. But as the interrogation continued, detectives sensed cracks in his demeanor. His alibi, though presented confidently at first, began to falter under the weight of scrutiny. Mark tried to maintain his composure, but the pressure of the detective's questioning slowly eroded his defenses. Under mounting tension, Mark finally admitted that he had discovered the affair only recently and had confronted Amir out of anger. The memories of his fury, the humiliation he felt, all surfaced as he recounted the events. Though he denied any involvement in Amir's death, insisting that his anger never turned violent, his confession painted a stark picture of the emotions simmering beneath his controlled exterior. The detectives noted every tremor in his voice, every hesitation, and each one seemed to reveal more than his words ever could. Days turned into weeks as the investigation continued, the entire community holding its breath. Mark's confession became a point of gossip among neighbors who had once regarded the Suttons as the epitome of suburban success. Yet the detectives still lacked conclusive evidence, their suspicions hovering between Mark and Charlotte, unable to decisively settle on one. Then, on the March 20th, a breakthrough came. Forensic analysis uncovered a piece of jewelry, a small but significant object, near Amir's body. It was a delicate bracelet, adorned with charms that matched ones Charlotte had been seen wearing on multiple occasions. This discovery, seemingly insignificant at first glance, altered the trajectory of the case entirely. The bracelet was well known among those in her social circles, a piece she had often worn at events and gatherings. The connection to the crime scene was undeniable, and it placed Charlotte at the center of the investigation. The police brought Charlotte in once more, this time with evidence that demanded explanation. Under the unyielding scrutiny of the investigators, she could feel the walls closing in, the weight of her decisions catching up with her. The jewelry was a concrete link that she could not easily dismiss, a silent witness to her proximity to the scene of Amir's death. As the questioning continued, Charlotte's once defensive attitude began to crumble. Her carefully guarded composure fell away, replaced by a palpable sense of desperation. The detectives could see the toll the investigation was taking, every new question dragging her deeper into a web from which she could not escape. News of her arrest spread like wildfire, sparking a media frenzy that only fueled the public's fascination with the scandal. Journalists gathered outside the police station, their cameras capturing every strained look, every detail of her exhausted expression. Her name became a headline, and her life, once so meticulously private, was now laid bare for the world to judge. Neighbors who had once admired her sophistication and grace now whispered about her downfall, weaving stories of betrayal and darkness that seemed more fiction than reality. Inside the police station, the detectives prepared for what would surely be one of the most high-profile trials the town had seen in years. They had pieced together enough evidence to charge Charlotte with Amir's murder, but questions remained, questions that hung over every revelation and every motive. Had she acted alone, or were there forces at play that even the investigators had yet to uncover? The media speculated endlessly, each report adding to the mystery, each twist drawing the public deeper into the tragic and convoluted affair. At the trial, details of the affair and the passionate arguments between the couple emerge, painting a disturbing picture of obsession and betrayal. Charlotte's defense team argues that she is a victim of circumstance, manipulated by Amir's infatuation, and driven to desperation by Mark's abuse. However, the evidence and community sentiment cast a dark shadow, as many believe her actions were calculated. The prosecution reveals Amir's journal, recovered from his small apartment, filled with letters to Charlotte and obsessive reflections. He'd written about his love for her, his dreams of escaping with her, and ultimately, his despair when she ended things. The entries give the court insight into Amir's state of mind, yet further implicate Charlotte, showing the depth of her betrayal. In the end, Charlotte is found guilty of Amir's murder, sentenced to life in prison. Mark, though absolved legally, becomes a pariah in the community, his reputation ruined. Charlotte's once beautiful suburban home remains empty, a chilling reminder of the tragic events. Years later, rumors circulate about the ghost of Amir haunting the old Sutton property, his love and sorrow lingering in the garden where he once found solace. For the residents of Rosefield, his story is a reminder of how easily lives can be destroyed by passion left unchecked. The dark tale remains a whispered warning, an echo of a love that led to tragedy. As you close the pages of this haunting story, one question lingers. Was it truly love, or was it something much darker? This reminds me of another immigrant case about a Venezuelan immigrant's affair with married neighbor. Kindly check out that case and like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates.